back to another episode of The Cup Reviews, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I am your host and co-producer of all things The Cup, Mackenzie, and I am joined by a fantastic panel today as we discuss today the wonderful National Theatre 2012 production of Sophocles' Antigone, and it was directed by the wonderful Polly Findlay. So, joining me on this journey, first off, we have the wonderful Kel returning to us. She is on audio today, but she is here with us in the space, and you can all admire her wonderful headshot. Kel, hello. Describe for us what is in your cup and what is going on with you on your end.
Right now, in my cup, it's just water, but it is a very wonderful novelty Shaun the Sheep mug, which is an animated claymation character, and he's very near and dear to my heart. Going on with me, right now, this is the end of my master's degree. I'm submitting in December, and it really is just those final dregs of the cup, but it's exciting too, nonetheless. That's what's up with me.
Love it. Also joining our wonderful panel is the incredible Jillian Robinson. Hello, Jill. Tell us what's in your cup. What is your ensemble today?
Yes. Hello, Mac. Thank you for the exaggeration of the introduction. Yes, in my cup today, I have, it's my dad's mug, but it is a Hippocrates quote, so I thought it was kind of Greekish fitting. It says, "Wherever the art of medicine is loved, there is also a love of humanity," which love of humanity is sort of a theme topic we can dive into with this piece today. Or lack of love of humanity, rather. That's my cup. My ensemble, I'm going with the buttoned-up button-up shirt, and flower decal, and kind of Ismene bounding today. The actress playing Ismene wore a shirt similar to this, and the flower accent on the headband here, we'll get into later today. But that's me.
Love it. And then we have my co-producer of all things The Cup, Mr. Ryan Borochovitz. Hello, Ryan.
Hello, Mac. Good to be here. I love talking some Sophocles.
I know, we covered this in our theater origins class together.
I've covered it in many other classes since, so it's nice to finally get on the record and just lay out all of my thoughts on the matter. In my cup, I'm also just drinking water. But this is a fun kind of vaguely themed cup. It is the King of Hearts, so King Creon, but also colloquially referred to as the Suicide King, and there's a lot of suicide in this play, so it is a heart on the screen, so I love that.
Cal, you're killing it with these emojis.
That's my cup.
Love it.
What's in your cup, Mac?
Well, I am on the red theme today, so I am drinking some Diet Cranberry Ginger Ale.
I was gonna say yes, red. Yes.
Yes, the red is flowing today. It's flowing. So let's get into this piece. Jill, we'll have you kick off our first question, which is, which character was best performed?
Yes, and good segue, because I forgot to mention the color of my shirt was kind of soldier-esque, and my best character was Luke Norris's Soldier. I think he is a brilliant actor. I've seen him in other works as well, and I just think he did this character beautifully. It was so clear that his character crutch is this immense fear of death and dying, and I think that's so lovely to see in the body of a soldier. He comes in, obviously he's like the first character we get battling off against Creon in a way, and he comes in super low status and low stakes and timid and fear, and there's just so much there's so much history he's bringing onto the stage of what he was just witnessing. You kind of get that in like a snap of a finger. He does a really good balance throughout that entire section he has of balancing the fear and funny. I put balancing fear and funny because his humor comes out in moments of darkness, which, a beautiful starter for what this piece is. His physicality was lovely, too, and super believable, so chef's kiss for Luke Norris's soldier.
Love that. Cal, how about you?
I really think that Jodie Whittaker has to be the linchpin of the production for me. I know it's not a very controversial choice to pick the main character of the play, but I think that she has such a propulsion to her speech, especially, and I really appreciate the choice for Christopher Eccleston and Jodie Whittaker to be able to keep their accents and not put on any sort of, faux RP King's English kind of thing.
Yeah. We will get into Antigone. I have thoughts about it, but we will save those for a little bit later.
So ominous.
Yes. Ryan, who is your shout out?
So I was torn between two, and to kind of, I guess, to piggyback slightly off of Kel, to stick with our Doctor Who's of this production, but who's who, if you will. I do really, well, it's also funny because this is 2012 and Jodie Whittaker didn't become the Doctor until 2017, so it's just kind of very, almost ironically coincidental that both of them are in this. But I think while Antigone's name is in the title, Christopher Eccleston really is the star of this show. He is on the stage the most. He does have to anchor so much of it with his domineering performance that really does suck so much of the air out of the room in a good way. And we do follow him on his journey, and I think he definitely deserves a big shout out for that. But if I can add a second shout out here,
sure.
The other Luke of this production, Luke Newberry, who played Heyman, I think really maybe stole the show for me in his brief appearance, because he was only like 18 when he did this production, so that's just very impressive, the craft he's displaying here. And for the whole first long chunk when it's just Creon monologuing at him, he does just so much with his face that you kind of see this mini journey that he's going on, just reacting to things without even saying a word. And then once he finally starts talking and really does give Creon a run for his money, he does hold his own so well against this very talented, eminent performer. And I think that whole scene probably was my favorite of the entire production, and I like that I have this opportunity to shout out both of them.
Love that. I will say for me, my shout out has to go to Jamie Ballard as the blind seer Tiresias. Yeah, I loved his performance because unlike a lot of the cast who didn't, I don't think we'll get into this more when we get into weakest elements, but their character arcs weren't fully built properly for me. There's a lot of big erratic jumps. There wasn't a nice natural curvature to their character journey arcs, as it were. But I found Jamie in his scene that he comes in on. He had such a nice natural build to that frustration, rage that he gets to at the end. It didn't come in wailing or big at the beginning. He came in as a calm presence, and then as Creon just kept defying him and kept pushing him, the more he got frustrated, the more you understood that final breakdown he has at the end with Creon. It's great. It was a great natural build to this person, and also his prosthetics, like that full facial prosthetic thing they had on him. Oh, it drew your eye to him, but it didn't detract from him. Like it didn't become him. Like a lot of times when you think of Phantom of the Opera, the first thing you think of is the mask, the grotesque prosthetics, and the actor can sometimes get lost beneath that or get overshadowed by the makeup. his performance was so strong that it actually complemented the process versus hindering him. And I mean, the way he had to keep his focus throughout that scene when he's got his one eye being like pulled down, it's like that's gotta be uncomfortable as all hell to go through that. So for me, I'm just like, bravo to him. Like, yeah, he came in and he hit a home run with that one scene. He really held it together for us. So well done. So Ryan, I'll let you start this next one, which is, what was your favorite production or design element of the piece?
Okay, I have an answer that feels like a bit of a cheat, but I was also super worried that someone would steal it if I didn't go first.
Okay.
It's the use of the chorus, which I guess kind of falls under directing, but okay, I don't know, that's ominous. We'll see if that pays off. But I just think, well, yeah, so I think this really does just kind of go as a shout out to Polly Findlay's directing and how she handled the chorus scenes. But yeah, I really just liked how, when you're dealing with anything like ancient Greek text, that's always a big question for contemporary audiences. How do you handle the chorus? Because it is like this very alienating, like really in the Brechtian sense, alienating device that does put us in a historical context, does separate us from more naturalistic staging that I think we're familiar with today, but it is so fundamental in the way that these plays are written and both conceived. So I've always, anytime I watch a Greek play, I'm always like very fascinated by what's done with the chorus, and I really liked, right from the beginning, we have this like no dialogue scene where it's the whole war room, the characters who we soon realize are the chorus, listening to the radio, hearing the outcome of the battle and the war. That's really setting this tone here, and I think that's the perfect way to kind of ease in the audience into this world with its kind of blend of the contemporary and classical. And then we have our opening scene with Antigone and Ismene, which then pivots to something that had me a little worried, is that when we just had one member of that war room talking, I'm like, oh, okay, is this going to be the chorus of just one person talking on their behalf? But then when the other members started chiming in, I thought it was kind of amazing, because it felt like they were talking to each other, and the text was divided in a way that really established this dialogue between them, and really almost differentiated them as their own standalone unique characters here, while still creating this choral, almost epic storytelling that does create these, chorality or tonal interludes between the actual main dialogue scenes by, bringing us into the world through all of these people. I also think it's very notable that all of the speaking members of the chorus are all men. We do have one female member of this war room, with not Eurydice, but there is like one secretary character who never gets a speaking role. So it's interesting that we have this chorus of men who really are both in agreement with Creon, but also keep him in check, and it's their approval that does shift his position through a lot of this. So. And there's a great scene near the end when Antigone kind of is calling to all the men in this room, like, come on, help, like, you must disobey, and not all of them keep their heads down, which I think is a very chef kiss there, powerful visual statement. And I don't have much more to say on it, but I do think, it was a very strong element in my mind. Alfred Enoch was there. I feel like we're often hard on him on this show, like in like our previous episodes on Red and Crave, but I like him, and it was just fun picking up, oh hey, I know him. That's all I have to say. I like the chorus.
Fair enough. Jill, what's your shout out?
Great segue, because alongside Brian was talking about how all of the chorus had their heads down, and they're usually on stage for most of it in their little pods and their nooks that were set up by the beautiful set. Set is where I'm going with this. That hands down is my favorite. I think it's simplistic, scope-wise, it's simplistic, right? We're in an office. That really doesn't change. We know that Creon's office is, first of all, a room that's baked onto a stage with opening and closing doors is, to me, adds a whole nother level. It's almost adding another stage to the stage, and having it as far upstage and center stage further physicalizes Creon's status and how Creon sort of runs the ship in more ways than one. But But then, yeah, each chorus member has their own desk, has their own space, has their own sort of anchor to, either veer away from Creon or to, I just loved that specific. So scope wise, it's lovely because it's simple. We're in one office space, but then the meticulous sort of attention and specificity brought to each desk, I think was just lovely. Like the layers to play with there were endless. And to just even get more specific, the sort of activeness that the set takes on, like near the end there, when one of our chorus members accidentally knocks over the basket, and those were props that were in that basket, those were office materials in that basket, and now they become the set, because once they're poured onto the stage, that sort of image of disaster and disarray is kept on the stage throughout the rest of the show, which I thought was really neat. Also, the recorder, there's one session when they're taking down, I think it was the soldiers.
Yes, testimony, the tape recorder.
And that tape recorder actually didn't stop until the chorus started post-conversationing about what happened, so it was like, oh, that's an interesting element. They got a little bit of the background secret information on that tape recorder. So I just think the set just really came alive. I liked the idea of the revolving. Like, again, it was a very simple use of the revolve. It didn't happen often, but when it did, it really did show that shift of the outside world, which essentially was just a cement wall, almost like a bunker, like a barricade, and then it revolves to this sort of male-dominated, white-collar workspace, and having that stark shift was really lovely, and I think drums home at the very end when Creon hand-bloodilies that's not a phrase, but the cement wall, sort of bringing those two worlds together.
Yes.
I feel like I could just talk for hours of the set, but I love the set, and I'm going to volley it to the next person.
I will piggyback, because set was my choice, too.
Cool.
I just went, it was so well made and layered and lived in. Ryan knows I love a good lived in set. Like Red, like this. Like those desks were chipped, they were dinged, they weren't fresh from IKEA. They were a built-in world that you were just being plopped into this office space. Yeah, you're right, Jill. It had a life. It had a lived-in life of that workspace. Like everybody was, I think Polly, our director, really made sure that these actors knew what was in every single desk on that set. So people were moving around on set. They had purpose. They had drive to where they were going to next. I also loved how they built in to the office Creon's idea of dictatorship and kingliness is. He has this imposing space. He has this portrait of himself in military garb hanging behind him at all times, as if like it's these ever-pressing eyes that hang over him, as like this thing of you must live up to this portrait in your office of what people think you are. And I also love the openness of the bullpen, so it was like naked in the middle, so it's almost like when you went into that middle space, you were in the fishbowl and everybody was now looking to see what you were going to do, so there was no place to hide in the office. So yeah, which once again just ratchets up Creon's concepts of him being viewed all the time as a leader and what people think of him as a leader, because he's always dead smack in the middle of that space. Everybody's always looking to him literally in that office space. It was great. Well done on the symbols there. You really just got the feel for the world of Creon in this space. Here. Cal, what are you thinking?
I was gonna, since everyone's mentioning set, Sutra Gilmore is the designer, and I just wanted to make sure that the name gets mentioned. I was also gonna stay in the same vein, and to me, I was gonna umbrella term production design as the intertwining element between set and costume. In particular, as a Ottawa specific reference, It reminded me of the Diefenbunker. I see Ryan smiling, knowing I would bring up
Love
the
the Diefenbunker.
Yeah!
Diefenbunker feel, for sure.
Yeah.
And I also really like there was a subtlety to the costumes. In Michael Billington's review, he calls it contemporary, but I was like, I know, like, there's just a touch of Cold War when it comes to the color palette, the styling, the hairstyles.
1950s, Mad Men.
It's modern, but not quite contemporary. They're not in togas, it's not ancient Greece, but yeah, I get what he's gesturing towards, but it's not quite today.
The specific thing for me that it really does well is that what I feel is really important about both Antigone and Oedipus is the idea of Thebes, the geographic city, as a city that has 7 gates, and there's this mentality of being always on guard for the threat outside the walls, but to continuously have the threat spring up from inside. So in Oedipus, you have, the plague is his fault when he's trying to find sort of like an outsider. And in this one, the conflict comes from inside the family unit between uncle and niece. So to put that in a space that already feels suffocating in a way, it highlights those ideas of confinement, and especially for Antigone's death to be buried alive, entombed, and then to have these characters willingly put themselves in a bunker in sort of this like nuclear era is such a strong choice, in my opinion.
Well said. And I mean, Kel, since you went last on our previous question, I'll let you start this next question, which is, what was the weakest aspect of the production?
Okay, so there are 2 elements that entwine together that I don't think I really got sold onto. One of them is that I think that Christopher Eccleston is a remarkable performer, and at the same time, I wanted to see his authority to be a little more hard-won. He was made king yesterday after a civil war in the like plot of the show, and it just seems like he's almost too natural of a leader at first, and I was kind of looking for more cracks in the like expertise as a personal sort of thing that I wanted to see out of Creon, because I feel like that really justifies if you have him be a more inexpert leader who is trying very hard to keep things together after a civil war finished yesterday. You can understand why he doubles down so hard on the first choice that he's made and has decided to stick to until he realizes it's too late. Without that, that's I guess just one like choice you could choose to play, but I was trying to scratch at the character and see, like, was there something there? Was there something there that justified why Creon was so steadfast? Yeah, and
if I could just jump on that, like, I totally get what you're saying, and I agree that seeing more of that might have been nice and definitely would have enriched the performance. Like, I don't have a problem with it not being there personally, partly as an appeal to other texts, even other texts by Sophocles. We see Creon in 3 of these Theban plays. Granted, they weren't written all together as a trilogy in their own right, but they often get, intertextually lumped into one, just because by virtue of the fact that all 3 of them have survived. And we see Creon playing the politician in both of the other ones, like Oedipus, the king, and Oedipus Hippolytus. And so I've always, and like, I know I have a special fondness for this character, but I've always seen him as someone who's just waiting for his moment to be king. So by the time he does step up into the role, and like I know that that's an interpretation, not necessarily the interpretation, but the moment, like in Oedipus the King, for example, he takes control the second Oedipus stabs out his eyes and determines that he has to be exiled from the city. Who's the one who steps up? It's Creon, and he's the one who's calling the shots from there. And then when we see him again at this colonist, he's the one who the civil war is about to break out, and he's the one who's trying to get things together. He's always kind of positioning himself in the seat of power, even if he doesn't quite have it yet until this moment. So I love what you're saying, and I love this idea of it'd be nice that now that he finally has it, maybe we could see the cracks, but I feel like he's been grooming himself for this for a very long time, and I don't fault him for taking to it very well.
I see. I also really like that interpretation, and I wish that it had maybe, like, this production had given me a little more to latch on to if that's what they were going for.
Sure.
But I also like that you bring that up because I had, like, recently, and by recently I mean back in March, watched Christopher Eccleston's Macbeth, which Polly Findlay directed for the Royal Shakespeare Company, and that does that sort of arc really does work well in Macbeth, and I feel, if anything, that speaks to Polly Findlay's growth as a director between 2011 and 19. I'm throwing those dates out, but I think that's what they are.
No, I can get behind that for sure.
Yeah. And Joe, are you piggybacking?
I can do a really good piggyback off of.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, because I also got a piggyback too.
Okay, but Kel also said you have a second one, so if you don't mind, let the piggybacks happen, and maybe we'll come back to that.
Or no, go ahead, Kel. I can double back. So go ahead, Kel. Finish your.
The other thing I was going to say is that the chorus scenes were some of my favorites because I felt like they let the play breathe. And this is a short play. It's like 90 minutes long, and I felt like there was in the Ismene scenes and some of Antigone's monologues and a few other parts. I was like, this can take its time. It doesn't need to feel like it's going by so fast. So I was just hoping for more stretches that really spend some time with the material.
I like the chorus, and I definitely wouldn't say no to more of it and longer of it, so I can get behind that too.
Yeah. Well, I think too what you were saying, Ryan, and what you just touched on is in that initial group choral sort of tableau-esque scene, they are breathing together, like their movements are all happening in this breathing motion. And what I was going to talk about when you brought that up, Brian, too, and Kelly, you're just jogging my memory about it again, is like it's very obvious that the chorus becomes the heartbeat and or lungs of this piece. And then just going back to what we talked about, like the staging of Creon's position on stage, which I'll get into later on. But to me, I think the chorus a lot. I would say, like, obviously Creon can run the roost on stage. That's sort of his space. But next in line, I would say, is the chorus kind of has the agency to move around and plant themselves and speak. And I think that's, go chorus. That's my touching on that.
Okay.
But yeah. Matt, do you want me to piggyback on what was happening before?
Sure.
Okay. So again, I'm kind of aligning with Kel here, and I think the overall thing I'm going to say is decomposition of self could have been more of a take home or a through line or a heartbeat of this piece. I think this production, so I guess my weakest element maybe rests in the vision, because I think this piece was stunning and it was there, but I think it could have gone farther. And an explanation of this is we've kind of already touched upon it, the era that this is sort of in and the set sort of painted the way that it is. I think there was such a beautiful juxtaposition to parallel to Polynices' decaying, rotting body. That is very much the beginning thesis of this piece, and why there's a butting of heads is this dead corpse is left exposed, and throughout the piece we are reminded as to how much more that body is decomposing and then is getting eaten at. So I think that could have married more into characters decomposing, and I think this also doubles back to how you were saying Creon is kind of coming right out of the gate with his white, pristine dress shirt ready to go. He's got the picture-perfect family, and Eurydice is by his side, and it's go, go, go. So as a standalone piece, I agree with you, Kel. I think what could have happened is peppered into, I guess, vision, direction, what have you. Having them be these, especially Eurydice and Creon, be these pristine sort of, we follow the rules, they're not penetrable at all. And then as the show goes on, you start seeing them lose themselves. And I'm going to use Eurydice as a really good case study for this. In her scene, where arguably that's the only moment, probably in her life, that she gets agency, being Creon's wife, and she comes out, unfortunately, the only time she has to speak is when she just heard about her son's death. And there was something off in that whole scene for me, and I was like, is this a character thing? Is this an actor thing? And then thinking of it outwardly, I'm like, no, this is a vision thing. I think you get the news of your child dying. I think there is room for the human to spiral, right? And so I thought it would have looked lovely to have her in that, unbutton her shirt because she can't breathe, because she's suffocated. We're talking about, this space is already so suffocating. The actor decided to lean on the desk, way before this sort of, grotesque imagery was brought back. But, what happens if she's, slowly backing away and then she falls and the desk catches her, right? And so there's so many things, even with Creon's final performance, what does it mean when he starts, wiping the blood on his face or something in frustration. So this beast decomposition of self, that's what was lacking, I think, overall. That was a big giant
I can piggyback off of you a bit because I have some similar thoughts. Well, I kind of have two weakest elements that they sort of go hand in hand, but I'll start with one that sort of just goes off of what you said. I just found the ending a little underwhelming. And it's a shame because this is I remember reading this play for the first time as an undergrad and just being blown away at just the devastation upon devastation upon devastation of one thing after another. Antigone kills Creon, has his realization that he was wrong, but too late. Antigone kills herself, and then Haman kills himself, and then Eurydice kills herself. It's just oh my god, when will it stop? And we could chalk some of this up to the fact that we're all so familiar with this play that it can't recreate that devastation of encountering it for the first time necessarily, but I really I wanted to see more from the ending, more wailing from Creon. He was too much of a blank slate of I am nothing. I think I don't know if this is Eccleston's fault necessarily as the performer, or if it was the director, or a combination of the two, or maybe even Don Taylor as our translator adapter here, but I feel the team took that I am nothing a little too literally, and I would have liked to see more bubbling beneath the surface of that. It didn't feel like he was annihilated to the point where, he is genuinely nothing. or that maybe was what they were going for, but yeah, I couldn't, like, are you sure you've just experienced the worst day of your life? Because it's kind of hard to tell in this moment.
I think to touch on that really quickly too, Ryan, is a lot of the major killings and or disaster plot points happen behind the scenes in this piece. So I think even more so, tragedy. Right? But even more so with this iteration, and which we've talked about, like the set sort of like sets the stage for. I think stakes are even higher for those who are on stage and coming from the moment before to come into this space, like, needed to be grittier.
Yeah, like, and I know it's tough kind of with a contemporary production to push back against that convention of all the violence happens on stage, that you do have to convey it on stage just through recitation of long messenger monologues and your reactions to them. And it is a very difficult needle to thread, and I don't envy those who have to figure out how to do it gracefully, but to me, yeah, the ending didn't feel as much of, like, the tragic oomph that I was hoping for to kind of arrive at, and even, like, that final image of him smacking the blood on the wall, like, to me, reading this play, I picture the elevator from The Shining, blood everywhere. Like, I don't picture just one little bloody handprint, and that's it. The royal house is forever stained. You could wash that off. That doesn't feel like the kind of, like, big blood, gory mess that these characters have gotten themselves into. So yeah, that was my first kind of piece of disappointment. I do have another one that, Mac, you're probably not going to like it. The Tiresias scene really didn't do it for me. And I will preface this, that this is nothing specifically against Jamie Ballard's performance. I thought he was quite good in the role, but I really didn't like the way that the character was characterized, for lack of a better word. One, I felt like he was too young, and that's, not against Ballard in particular, but he didn't really, like, carry himself with a sense of wisdom or life experience that really, I think, and I don't know, on the page we don't really get good answers for how old the character is supposed to be, but he's so disheveled, underdressed, like he just came out of, like, a fire. He's quite young. I watching the scene, didn't get the sense of why would button-up businessman, president, and Creon listen to this guy if not for the textual explanation that, oh, well, he's a seer and he's right about everything. Like, if someone like Creon walked by someone like that on the streets, they wouldn't even give them a second glance. And it just didn't really seem, in my mind, to speak to the authority that this character is supposed to wield. And, like, I thought the performance was great, and I will agree with you, Mac, that Ballard handled it well. There was, like, a nice little journey going on in that scene, but it just seemed off and, like, too contradictory to what the rest of the aesthetic of the production was going for. He seemed like, if we're going with this Diefenbunker imagery, he seemed like he was outside of the bunker, caught in, like, a nuclear war, which, yeah, you can, and I'm sure that's something to the effect of that is what they were going for. It just seems so weird that this is the expert that you bring in to advise you, like, and yeah, I don't know what the fix to it necessarily would be, to have him be, like, maybe a 5-star general, or, like, a very...
Yeah, army veteran.
Yeah, army veteran, someone who kind of, you believe, knows their stuff, and you believe that someone like Creon would listen to him. Because, yeah, like, leaders like Creon and Oedipus in the earlier play always start from a place of, oh, you are so wise, you know all your stuff, of course I'll listen to you, and they only turn against him when he says something contrary to what they want to hear. That's kind of the beautiful irony of this character. Mm-hmm. So, to bring him in, and he looks just like, disaster hobo, for lack of a better word. I just didn't buy it. He didn't feel like he belonged in the scene, and it didn't make sense to me that Creon would even give him the time of day.
Well, I mean, for me, I guess I'll triple back on stuff, I guess, at this point. I don't know. But yeah, like, for me, it's the lack of character development and journey. These characters, like, what's her name? Jodie Whittaker as Antigone. She played Manic really well, but she came in right off the top out of 10 and had nowhere for herself to build. And I was like, build your desperation, build your frustration with Creon. She comes in hot and ready from the get-go. There's no natural, but Creon is the opposite. He's flatlining through most of it. And then all of a sudden it's like, now he's attacking his son randomly. And it's like, Where was the build to that frustration? Like, there was no natural crescendoing in this. It was like spiking, randomly spiking all of a sudden. And I'm like, build me something. Same thing with the chorus at the end. And the chorus throughout, they were kind of, I like the fact they were there, and I thought they were used well to build the world of that office. But every time they came up, I didn't feel the agency. And that really hit at the end when, like, the guy comes on to be the messenger describing his death, and I'm like, you have no agency here. It's like the thousandth time you said this monologue, and there's no, emotion behind what it said. I mean, he's covered in mud and gunk. Like, he comes in dressed as if he's broken and has seen something horrible. Then it's like, oh, okay. I'm like, yeah, like, you need more crescendos, more versus just random spikes. Build me something. And Ryan, you're right, at the end with Christopher Eccleston's Creon, like, show me his slow deflation, the life fading out of him, or him choking, or the oxygen starving out him so he goes numb at the end. Let him come in being almost to the Lear level of howl, 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 as he's carrying his son. That's where he should come in at. And then, as he breaks further, and as he sees his wife for her death, we should just see the life fade from him when he realizes that he's lost everything. That's how that scene should have gone. Instead, he came in and it's like pushing a cart with his dead son, and it's like, my son died. It was
the
bad.
cart was a little much for me,
right?
Yeah.
Well, that's a callback to ancient Greece. The dead bodies do come out on a cart, but yeah, it didn't fit the setting here. I think they could have done
No.
But also, great,
carrying his
props
son.
to Luke Newberry for laying that way as an actor on that cart.
That would be uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable.
Yes.
Props to you, Snaps.
Well, he was dead. What? There wasn't actually dead. Wow. Even better acting than I thought.
But yeah, for me, I wanted more character development and journey. Like, I'd say Ismene was better at her character journey in this piece, where she starts from a place of reserved, I can't go with you, and taking you to desperation of, don't leave me, sister. Let me die with you. There was a great build to her character in that desperation. And even in her scenes where she's facing the opposite direction and she's desperate, there was this great push and pull she had. And I mean, the best scenes of it were when Antigone and Creon were going at it with each other. Those are the most dynamic. And that's where I think they worked best, was in those. But even in that, there wasn't enough fluctuation for me. I wanted to see, I think different actions, different tactics. Like let Antigone try a different ploy to try and win Creon over. Like, she was always just yelling at him, and I'm like, try a different tactic. Show how smart you are with trying to get what you want. Like, if tactic 1 doesn't work, try tactic 2. Like, build and change. Don't just stay on the path. Like, shake it up a bit for me.
I agree with that too, Mac. And again, I think it'll go back to like a decomposition of self. And
That's
what
exactly.
does that mean to you? Because there's different ways you can decompress, you can decompose, you can go off the rails and run around and stamp and rave and be mad. Or what does it mean to just stay stoic and like hold your ground, and you are exuding, your innards are literally falling out from under you, and there wasn't that shift in either one of our quote unquote protagonists, like in Creon or Antigone. I think they both had moments of potentially going there, but it wasn't flushed out. And then I started asking my question, like, is this supposed to mean, like, we have, again, this body who is, like, Polynices, dead, and we actively know, physically, he is decomposing as we speak. I started, like, is this supposed to be, like, a dramaturgical question of, like, are you not allowed permission to slip up or break down until death? Like, is that what this world is trying to paint?
Maybe, but to me that goes against the point of the body decomposing where it lays in the streets. Like, it doesn't just stay preserved, like until suddenly it disappears and dissolves. So, yeah, I don't know, like, I like where your thoughts are going here. I don't know if they put that much thought into it, honestly, I think is what it comes down to.
But I think there's so much meticulous thought brought into other elements of this piece that it's like there's a loophole here. There's a black hole that is like
there's a missing spot.
In my dream production of Antigone, it would definitely have some element of like regimented ness around the body, especially of the soldiers, is what I'm thinking of like the meticulous training you have to put a body through, and that it's that I kind of wish that we could have gotten more of that in this somehow. Like that is kind of my ideal, because I think that if that's what the production were going for, it would also show up as an element in the deaths of Eurydice, Haemon, and Antigone. Like that would kind of draw it all together nicely, in my mind at least.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, wonderful. I think we're all very on the same wavelength with this. But let's head into the last question for this section, which is, would you recommend this production to others? Brian, as you are now currently TAing a theater origins theater history class, would you want to show this production to your students if you covered Antigone?
Yes. So in the class I'm currently teaching, we didn't have Antigone on the syllabus, and we've already passed our ancient Greek module as it is.
Was it Oedipus you guys did instead?
We did do Oedipus, and we only had time for one. We didn't even get to do Aristophanes, which is disappointing. But, well, yeah, like if you have to do only two Greek plays, you would want to have a tragedy and a comedy. You can't always afford to have two tragedies, especially two tragedies by the same author. But yeah, I think I can definitely envision future situations where I would be teaching Antigone, and I 100% would choose this production as one to show students. Like, I've seen a lot of versions of this play. I've seen ones in togas, I've seen ones in vaguely fascist or Stalinist or whatever military kind of dress, insert totalitarian here. And I've even seen like very contemporary dress ones, but I think this one kind of just strikes the perfect balance between the modern and the contemporary, well, not modern and the classical, in terms of keeping a lot of these classical elements. Like I like what they did with the chorus, that it didn't feel anachronistic in this world, but still did play with those elements of this Greek chorality. I liked, just so much of the way it was structured and composed, but really like did draw us into this world and did have this feeling of claustrophobia that I do think is essential for this. And while I am disappointed with certain scenes, and especially the ending, I do think there maybe is some learning experience in that for how difficult it is to really convey the same dread and depth of despair that these texts had in their day that maybe does get lost in translation in the contemporary stage. And I would encourage students to unpack that for what would you maybe do differently with the ending that could bring us to this point. So yeah, I am very happy with this production, and I would 100% show it to students.
Love it. Jill?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. So, veering away from the technicalities and visions, I think staging, vocal variety, and text deliverance are my sort of pillar points for this one, because so talking about staging, we kind of already touched on this with Creon. I think there was such a lovely space that we talked about. This is sort of Creon's bullpen. You have his office at the top here, and you can totally tell when anyone tries to sort of get in his space, that spiraled. Like the women in their scene, they're center stage, but they don't have the agency to stand, and they even have to deliver their text back to back without even outwards to the audience. So, going further evidence to, I think this version does a wonderful job of touching on relevant feminism viewpoints, and it even bakes that into the character of Haemon, and how almost in a conversational sense, there's this battle and shift of power happening between generations, whether you like it or not. And it's not a kind of we both wield our swords, let's go at it. It's there's an opportunity for education, there's an opportunity to be informed, and that's pushed away. And I think that's the through line of it. You could take that as Antigone in whatever production, but especially in this one, it's on the table. Like, it's very clear. And I think the actors we were talking nitpicking the certain staging elements, but I think the actors' vocal variety and text deliverance of this heightened text is so clear that you don't have to be a Greek theater enthusiast to understand the story that's going on and understand the message that's supposed to be told, which I think is so important, because I would welcome theater students to watch this. I would also welcome anybody and everybody to come see this show. So lots of different elements that definitely this one, like Ryan, I have seen some iterations of Antigone too. Oddly enough, most of them had been like abstract, sort of post-apocalypse versions of the show versus like the OG Greek. But I thought this one was magnificent.
Love it. Kel, as someone who is going through with her master's and who is a TA as well, would you use this as a teaching resource?
I absolutely would. I asked well in advance to be on this episode because Antigone is my favorite Greek play, bar none. So this would certainly be on my syllabus, and I think that there's so much that this production brings to the table to chew on, both in terms of likes and dislikes, and successes and weaknesses, that it would give students a variety to write a review or an essay response to. I also pitched this to some not classical theater, not Greek tragedy fans around me as, do you want to see two of the Doctor Who doctors in a play together? Which doesn't have as much personal relevance for me, but it did sell two people into spending 90 minutes watching this alongside me. I was like, I have to do this. But I'm always, looking to bring people into shows that I really like. Yeah. And so I think that the as an entry point, this show is really approachable as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think this is a fantastic 5 out of 5 production. I give this a solid 3 out of 5. It's a good, solid production that you could show people, that people could get into. There is the appeal, as Kel said, of the two Doctor Who's, that you definitely can sell that to general audiences who are not big Greek play fans. I think this production did a very good job tackling the Greek text and making it conversational and accessible. So I'm all for that. I don't know how many recordings there are of Antigone that you can show. There's a lot. Okay.
This is a very old play, remember?
Oh yes. So I mean,
I think in class, in my classics courses, they showed the I think it was like a BBC in ancient Greek mask, filmed for TV, public broadcast, that had William Shatner in it, ? I think that's the Oedipus one.
You're thinking of the Oedipus one. Yeah, that was actually, I believe that was a Stratford production with William Shatner as the prologue. And I don't remember, was it Douglas Campbell? No, it's probably the right one. Yeah, who played Oedipus. But I know exactly which video you're thinking of, but I believe that one is Oedipus. But so there's no lack of BBC Antigones or any, there's probably at least 6 of them that have been filmed.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a solid visual aid, good modern NTS production to show people. While it's not the most dynamic production, it does a solid job with what it's got to do, and it tells the story pretty well. So I'd say, show it to people. We'll have some fun with it. Yeah, it'll definitely give you something to chew on. Okay, let's get to the next section, which is our text-based questions. So the first question is, Whose argument position do you agree with? Antigone or between Antigone and Creon? Can you sympathize with the other's motives and reasonings? I will let Ryan start this one.
Okay. I will preface all my comments with I'm obviously on Team Antigone, who isn't, but like that said,
I am clearly Team Creon.
But like I have a lot of sympathy for Creon, and for as several of you in this room certainly know, I wrote a whole play about Creon.
Yes.
Called The Sphinx Lands in Corinth, which I've maybe mentioned on the show a couple times before. But yeah, I think Creon is just such a fascinating character, and there's a lot you can unpack with him. And even if we do want to go with the interpretation that you were mentioning of this is his first day on the job, it explains why he doubles down on this way. Like, yeah, he definitely inherits a very bad situation when he does step into the leadership position here. And, perhaps he is a little too confident or forces his confidence too much, but I don't blame him for wanting to assert his authority and establish himself as the new leader, especially keep in mind that he has something that would have been very important to ancient Greeks. He has no divine right of king's authority over the Theban crown. His sister, Jocasta, twice married into it by marrying Laius and then married Oedipus. Who, Oedipus, well, fun fact, like, Oedipus, I go back and forth between the two, but, like, fun fact, like, the original Greek title, Oedipus Tyrannos, which often gets translated as Oedipus the King, or Oedipus Rex, Latinized, the Tyrannos refers to a tyrant, which nowadays we associate to be just someone of, like a terrible leader, but it actually, in Greek, just refers to someone who was the king, but not by right of birth or blood. It was an illegitimate ruler, and the fact that we tend to conflate that with bad ruler maybe says a lot for what the burgeoning democracy of ancient Greece thought about their, kings who came to power through a popular rule as opposed to divine right of kings. But Creon, of course, the great irony of that title, Oedipus Tyrannos, is little did he realize he was the true heir to that throne because, he, through hilarious circumstances, found his way back to his hometown of Thebes. But Creon very hilarious. But Creon is like, he has no real right to this throne. It's his sister only was associated to it through marriage. And it has been one bad situation after another, and he steps up to the plate. I have my theory that I think he really wants to, and certainly in my own rendering of the character in the play I wrote, it's kind of the tragedy of someone who insists on being a politician even when he really shouldn't.
Don't we know a few of those?
Yeah, well, that I think is Creon in a nutshell. But something to kind of historicize this question a little bit, to an ancient Greek audience, and I would say this is certainly applicable still today, Creon, not Antigone, but Creon, is the protagonist of the story, and certainly the tragic hero of the story. Antigone doesn't go through an arc. She's not the one who suffers. Sure, she dies, and it's like very sad for her, and but she achieves her goals, and she's immovable throughout it. She is this immovable object that Creon comes up against that challenges his authority and forces him to really evaluate his own hubris and his own, leading him on this path of self-destruction that ultimately does culminate in the disaster of Creon. We tend to, it's the first thing you teach a high schooler about usually Shakespearean tragedy of the tragic hero doesn't have to die at the end of the story. Yeah. And we usually point to something like Oedipus, or I would say something like Antigone as a good example that Antigone dies, but it's really Creon's story, and he loses everything but is forced to live at the end of it. And that's why I don't like productions very much that turn, and we'll get into this in a later question too, but I don't love productions that vague, totalitarianism that I talked about in like a lot of the productions I've seen that just insert like leader you don't like at various stage in time, and that's Creon here, and that's what most productions in their own times tend to do, because we are supposed to feel catharsis in relation to Creon's journey. As the tragic hero, we pity him for not realizing his mistakes and fear that that could be ourselves. That is like the Aristotelian, or more kind of Lessing, but we don't need to get into German Romanticism here. But like, but yeah, so
you are, Ryan.
Okay, well, but no, we are supposed to follow his journey and sympathize with him, or else we cannot achieve catharsis. And if we just think, oh well, he's basically Hitler or he's basically Trump, we're not going to be able to relate to him in the same way or feel that tragic pathos that we are supposed to for the character. So I do, even if I don't agree with him, and we're obviously not supposed to agree with him, I feel a lot for Creon, and I express caution to anyone who presents him in a way that inhibits that feeling. That's end TED Talk. Someone else can speak.
I'll piggyback because I had similar notes, which is, yes, and morally I agree with Antigone. She is right. No matter if your dead is friend or foe, you treat their bodies, their mortal coils, with decency and respect. You don't disrespect a corpse. That was somebody. That was somebody's loved one. That was somebody's family. And by doing that, you're actually probably making more enemies by disrespecting the dead. You're getting more people angry at you. So Antigone's absolutely right. She's very wise in the moment. She's like, it doesn't matter if he was a rebel. He was family to you, and he was my brother, and he had his followers. People supported him. So treat him with some type of respect and care. But I also get Creon, because he is someone who knows what he wants to be as a leader. He is someone who sees the dangers of being someone who is weaker as a leader, who in this day and age when somebody who was weaker could easily be picked off by an advisor or somebody else in the court who basically be like, he's weak, get him out. So he knows that the danger of appearing too weak would paint a target on him and his family's back. Right when he sees the power that he's wanted since the beginning of this trilogy of Greek Sophocles plays. That not a trilogy, but a trilogy. Yeah. Anyway, but the point being is that Creon has this very relatable struggle of wanting to be a good father, a good husband, a good uncle, but also, crap, I'm also the leader here, and I have to kind of hold my line, because if I don't, what does that say about me as this new leader that's taken over this position? Yeah, and we see that all the time with leaders. I mean, Margaret Thatcher did not have to go to battle in the Falklands for a little, a poor little diddly island, right? The reason she went and did that was because she realized, if I don't do this as a leader, I'm out of a job. Myself and the country will be seen as weak for not defending our stance, our land, whatever. And that's exactly what Creon's here. Creon makes an edict at the top of the show, and he knows to backpedal is to show weakness. And this idea of masculine leadership, where you can't show weakness because showing weakness is fallibility, that is where he's stuck between a rock and a hard place. I think that is a very relatable thing a lot of people, as leaders, male or female, in a workplace can sympathize with. Because there's always people there to judge you. You're always going to be in that fishbowl as a leader, and people will challenge you and will question you if you show weakness or that you're on shaky ground and that you won't fully back your own stance. So yeah, I do have sympathy for Creon. I do see his reasoning. Even if I don't fully agree, I do fully understand his reasoning for why he does what he does. Keller Jill, take it away.
I'll hop on and say, especially everything that Ryan has said about Creon being the main character, I absolutely agree with. Protagonist. I know I earlier referenced Antigone as the main character, as like the eponymous character, but
yes, it is her play in a certain way, but Creon is the one. And let's not forget that Aristotle, who kind of establishes our standard for what constitutes a tragic hero, he has a lovely line in there about how a woman couldn't possibly be a tragic hero because she has no status to fall from. So, but as awful as that is, it does historicize our view very central female characters like Antigone or Medea wouldn't have been seen as the tragic hero to their audiences. Creon is the tragic hero of Antigone. Jason is the tragic hero of Medea. So,
I love that you bring Jason into it, because the one that I was thinking of was Phaedra and Hippolytus, and who's the main character versus who's like the tragic hero, which is obviously Hippolytus. Even though it's really like I guess like Phaedra's story, but we will save that family tree for another time.
I would also want to chomp at the bit to Orus Theseus, the tragic hero, because he's the one who has to deal with the grief at the end. Okay, we're not.
Yeah, save it, Ryan. Save it.
Some other time. I wanted to say, Team Antigone, but I'd love to complicate my own relationship to that, because the way that so I'm on board with the idea that people have inalienable human rights. I'm not the kind of person who will interpret the law from a so it is written, so it shall be point, because it when you look at everything from universal suffrage didn't exist widely, but that was legal but not morally right. To use some very broad strokes philosophical terms. So that is the part I get Antigone on that level, and then the 2 points where two among many that I want to bring in as a complicated tension I feel. First, that she approaches it from the point that there is divine law, and my own personal background that I've mentioned in the Angels in America podcast was growing up in a very conservative Catholic high school and seeing many justifications of the rescinding of people's hard-won freedoms on the grounds of a divine basis. So I like that. I like that this play gives me something that doesn't sit right with my sort of secular opinions of justice. And then the second part too, that really interests me and might be my most favorite speech in the play is that Antigone would not have done this for a husband because she could marry again. She wouldn't have done this for a child because she could have a child. But because her mother and father are dead, she will have no brothers. And it is for this that she will defy Creon, because he's the last of her family unit. And that's such a affronting speech, especially to the ideas of expecting, from a gender roles aspect, expecting women to give up their surnames to take on a married name, to give up the connection with a household when they transition into marriage, motherhood, as this all-consuming identity that erases whatever's come before it. I also think that I can really go down a far side tangent rabbit hole about how I feel about Antigone and Haman as an engaged couple that represents the the hope and the potential of a new and sort of like redemptive family unit for the House of Thebes that has had much suffering, and the fact that that is thwarted is, I think, a aspect of the play that just endlessly fascinates me. So I like that. So I know in some of the background material for the play, I can't remember if it was either Polly Findlay, Luke Newbury, or Jodie Whittaker bringing up the fact that Haman and Antigone are never on stage at the same time. So you have a very limited way in which you can sell the truth of this relationship, where somebody is willing to die for the other person, and it's I think one of my favorite relationships in all of theater, because of that tension between how you see Haman interact with Creon and then Antigone saying, I could get over my husband dying, but I can't get over this.
I'd love to add on that, the fact that they should never appear on stage together. Sorry, I'm nerding out here, but let's not forget, Sophocles was operating on a skeleton crew. When we say that he added, historically, we credit him for adding the third character on stage, that originally we just had a chorus, then Thespis came along and said, but what if one person is acting roles, and he invented theater, and then Aeschylus added the second character and invented drama, the conflicting characters in dialogue, and Sophocles came along and said, but what if there were three people speaking on stage? That's not just a dramaturgical concern, that is a practical concern, that aside from the chorus, there would only be three actors in this company. So something I just love doing when I read Greek plays is tracking who exits before someone else enters and thinking that role was probably double cast. So there's a very good chance that Antigone and Haman were played by the same actor, granted wearing a different mask.
Yes.
And,
Or
probably also Tiresias.
Yeah. Okay, I'm doing excited hand gestures because the other thing that I want to bring up is, I can't remember if it's in the text of Antigone and it's cut, or if it's in Seven Against Thebes, or another, fragment of some epic. But that Haman is Haman number 2. Eurydice has had a previous child named Haman who's died, and she's named her second son Haman as a replacement child. And I love that death just clings to this character who is the other half of Antigone, who is herself somebody whose birth is fraught, to say the very least. So you have this these two sides of the same coin of characters. There's a birth-death thing going on, and also the fact that they do die together, and it's Sophocles. He sticks around for a good reason.
He knew what he was doing.
My dog.
Jill, what are your thoughts?
So many good thoughts, so mine, you can throw mine out. But maybe this is throwing a wrench. Neither. I don't have really sympathy for either, and here's why. And maybe it's because I've seen this production. I've certainly read it at least once, but that's about it. I don't have as much of a deeper background to it. And I think with this production we just watched, of it being in the forefront to answer these types of questions, these text-based questions, I think they're both very selfish. And I think, so I guess maybe this is sort of a contemporary way of answering this question, but I think both Creon and Antigone have their individual objectives are made very clear from the beginning. I think Creon, like we talked about, gets placed into this position of power out of nowhere, but I think from the beginning of that sort of name tag been put on him, it's very much driven my family, this.
Yeah.
There's no outward scope to the voice. So the voice of it's we get into the sort of disgusting reality of when the voice of the people will give two shits about the actual voice of the people, if that makes sense. Like the person who has the title of being the voice for the people gives two shits about the voice of the people. And I think this is very obvious in Creon. But, so yeah, sure, we can go down to just to support that a little bit of, yes, the tragic hero, we see his demise practically like that. Seeing that arc, seeing that as the audience, like, yes, check mark, great. Maybe this is me coming from let's sort of give the voice back to the people vibe. But I think, so it's clearly you see that in Creon. With Antigone, you don't see it as clearly, but I think kind of going on maybe what Kel was touching on, or maybe I'm interpreting this not the way you were going, Kel, but like, with Antigone, she's obsessed with this burying of brother. She's obsessed with this, like, I must do this must happen, this divine, sacred, routine, tradition has to happen, so much so that quite, like, in this production, and again, I'm not familiar with the original text, so I don't know if it's particularly this translation, but she literally says, like, I'm fine dying. I just gotta do this. This has to be done, but I'm fine dying. And it's like, there's so much potential with this Antigone shell to look beyond your dead brother, who's already dead and is not alive and is not presently suffering and breathing, or for lack of being able to breathe, because we discussed about how this is such a suffocating society. Get beyond the people who have perished and start, like, being present. And so I guess it's a character flaw in both of them, of they're so obsessed with what they think they want and they think they need, that this idea of, and this is where you enter the voice of the chorus, where we get at least some sort of body or bodies representing the lack of representation for body and bodies, especially in this conversation talking about the title of this piece is Antigone, but yet our protagonist is Creon. Oh, right, well, where does that leave the underlying message of Thebes, right? Like, where is Thebes in that if we're so focused on Antigone and Creon? So I think the one thing that I at least, like, all in all, sure, like, me being a woman, like, yes, I'm also Team Antigone, and especially in this production, because I think at least she does go beyond herself in some of the speeches of saying, of, like, dropping point of putting fire under Creon's butt. I think the prophet does this as well, but, like, in both of their sort of, honestly, it's sister staging of Antigone's monologue and the prophet's monologue. Again, sorry, I'm talking about this particular production, but they're the ones that at least drop in to Creon of, like, the world exists outside of yourself, so at least she has that going for her. But I think, like, she's a culprit of that in a lot of instances too, and this might be a beautiful segue to our next question, but I think that's why people like Ismene and Haman and Eurydice perish, because these two power mongers, they're both their idea for power, their trajectory for power is very different, but they're very the same in ways as well.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, in that case, Jill, since you ended our last section, why don't you start this next section, which is all about the middle ground characters, and as highlighted with the wonderful character of Ismene. It is, and she's often overlooked in favor of her more famous sister, the titular Antigone. If Ismene did not exist in this piece, would something be lost? What would this piece be in her absence? Jill, break it down for us.
I put everything's lost, LOL. Again, I'm using this production as sort of a case study, but I think this would ring true in the text as well. Ismene is so fascinating because, again, talking about Antigone and Creon being quite similar, we are dealing traditionally, in a sense, with male and or versus female. And I think Antigone is the one wearing the armor, is the one putting herself in battle in direct collision with Creon. But it's Ismene who, so in a way, I think Antigone is sort of forced to endow those masculine troped qualities in order to do that, to place herself in some sort of alliance or equal playing field as Creon. And I think Ismene operates as the sort of feminine grounding quality that can actually work towards Antigone's extra strength against Creon. Again, talking about Antigone is so open and willing to throw away her life. Her life isn't worth living, but it's Ismene that is sort of reminding her of, like, this is our uncle, we can't do this, or just doing, she's basically the vehicle for Antigone's sanity in a way of, like I said, like grounding her down to, like, this is happening now, how can we, she sort of acts as the glue, or the, like, how can we do what's right and stay on the track of morality, but in a way that everyone sort of wins or resolves? Because I think if she wasn't present, I honestly think Antigone was already, with her sort of steadfastness of, like, I can die, I can totally die, just this thing needs to happen. She starts off unhinged, and I think that would have just thrown her and Creon right into the ring. And unfortunately, due to her being female, she doesn't have the status. Him being in power, he has that over her. The story wouldn't be tethered down without that sort of back of the mind Ismene, and especially when she perishes. That again is sort of like this background catalyst. So I think it would have just ended. That dynamic grounding ability would not have been present. I think she really, Ismene, in contrast to Antigone, represents this sort of lightness, this like there is light at the end of the tunnel, this sort of hope that Antigone does not have baked into her at all. And so that light actually is igniting a fuel for Antigone doing what she's doing. Because I think left to her own devices, she wouldn't be able to reason in the way that we hear her do in some of her monologues, some of her speeches. So that's
Cal, love that.
So in that, I know I spoke about how Haman and Antigone make two sides of one coin for me. Ismene and Antigone as well really carry, like, I think there's such a strength in how Sophocles chooses to juxtapose his characters, and the value for me of her presence is that she, in that you have a very typical depiction of what ancient Greece would value in womanhood, that conventionality shows how far and how radical some of Antigone's arguments and choices are. How she's not being her challenge to authority, especially the authority of her own sort of eldest living family member, in the males of her family line. I'm trying to like pull it together in one sort of succinct word, but that, like, in that you have the both, you get to see a richer and more dynamic portrait of each.
Yeah, I mean, I'll piggyback off Cal there, because I also had in my notes that Ismene Ismene. She is a reflection of Thebes to Antigone, and she gives Antigone that drive of defiance, basically, because Antigone is much more the reserved, follow the rules, follow society's guidelines of what women should be. Oh, sorry. Yes. Thank you. Yes. Ismene represents what the ideal woman, wife, mother, daughter should be. Like, she could be a future Eurydice down the road to a political husband. And so Antigone is very much clearly against the system in that sense. And so it's that drive of, you give somebody like that to Antigone to really right off the get-go, in that first scene, it gives her something to push against. It gives her something to drive against. And that's important to set up who Antigone is, because she disappears for a bit. Antigone is not seen. She's in the first scene, and then she kind of goes away for a while until she's dragged back on. That's like a good half hour. Yeah, that's it, 20 minutes, half hour. She's not around, and you kind of get Creon. So it's important to kind of give that dynamic. And I think also it's important to have the middle voice in the middle, because, I mean, too often we see this in politics today, we see this in the world today, where the far ends of each spectrum, left and right, like to shout at the other end of the spectrum. And oftentimes there's a lot of people in the middle who just want to survive and prosper and do well for themselves without, like, going to the furthest ends of the spectrum. And so I think it's just great to have that voice there, because she's the middle ground between Creon and Antigone. She's the one who understands her sister's anger and sadness at losing a family member. But she also goes, Creon is king. And the law is the law is the law. Like, you gotta give a little here. Like, our brother technically did break the law. He went out and started a rebellion. Like, we can't disagree on the facts of that, sister. So I think she's just a fascinating middle ground character, and oftentimes the middle ground gets lost. So to have a voice to the middle is really nice, and actually have an identifiable figure in the middle, because the chorus can also act as a middle voice, but they're also the outside narrative voice too. So to actually have someone in the conflict, in the middle, trying to level people out, is a really interesting person to have. And I think if you take that away, it just becomes two ends of the spectrum yelling at each other. And that just doesn't get as interesting. It's always interesting when there's somebody in the middle who's on the journey. Because a lot of us sit in the middle. We very rarely do we go to extremes. We are oftentimes found in the middle of a spectrum. So, yeah, I find it interesting. Ron, I see your professor brain spinning here.
I'm sorry, but I think I have to disagree.
Okay.
Because, well, I agree that, like the chorus, Ismene serves as this kind of audience POV character that someone who the audience can sort of anchor themselves to and follow along the journey, because Antigone never changes her mind, and Creon only changes his mind at the very end. So somebody who has this kind of flip-floppiness to them is helpful, and someone who isn't so immediately fixed in that main conflict. But I don't really agree that Ismene is a middle ground character, because she never agrees with Creon. She never upholds his point that, like, well, you know what, he did, Polyneices did invade the city, that he, and she never says that, well, we have to abide by the rule of law, because, like, what is society without it? Like, she only forestalls action out of fear of consequence. And she's also only in 2 scenes, and the next time we see her, we don't really follow her journey on that, but she decides, you know what, I can't let my sister die alone, so I did agree with your cause, I will die with you, and Antigone's like, snooze, you lose, like, but, like, I don't see her as someone that the audience can really, like, latch onto opinion-wise of judging the middle ground position between these two poles. She agrees with Antigone from start to finish, but just represents the audience view of, oh, I too would like to partake in radical politics, but am afraid of the consequences, and therefore I won't. I'm sorry.
That's a very human middle point.
It is, and that's why I would not remove her from the production as this kind of question, and sort of started us off with as a prompt. And I think she does contribute something valuable to it, it, but I do disagree that she represents a middle wavering opinion that allows the audience to kind of deliberate between our two central agonists. And something else that I think of, just to go back to this original framing of the question of what would this piece be in her absence, like we've talked already, and Mac, I think you mentioned this, and it comes back to the thing we talked about earlier about how this really is kind of Creon's play for the most part. Antigone, despite being the title character, isn't in it a lot, and most of her time on stage is spent talking to Ismene. So I'm just trying to think dramaturgically, if we remove this character, who does Antigone talk to? Like, we would lose that whole opening scene, and it would just become maybe a monologue at best, or we can, I don't know, sub in the chords.
It just goes back to what I was saying. Like, Ismene operates as an extension of Antigone. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what I think is her primary function.
Yeah, not to bring up Medea again, but she kind of reminds me of, like, the nurse from Medea more so than who, you know, or even, like, Hippolytus. There's also the nurse character in that, who maybe takes more action than she should have, but unlike Ismene, who takes, like, very little action over the course of the play. And, so I like, I think her narrative function, for the most part, is just to be a sounding board for Antigone in that opening scene, and then by watching her affirm the correctness of Antigone's position in that later scene, it does really guide the audience towards, okay, this is the right position, and no amount of authoritarian rule of law can change that, and even people who are afraid of those consequences should ultimately put their foot down and agree with it, as Antigone has done from the start, and as we see Ismene eventually arrive at. And while we're on the subject of Ismene, this kind of goes away from the question a little bit, but, like, Kel, I liked how you mentioned earlier that very important monologue about how I can marry again, I can have other husbands, I wouldn't have done this if it wasn't for a brother. And this brings us back a bit to the patriarchal structures of how ancient Greeks value their women, but she still has a sister. It's not like she's lost her final sibling. She has someone else she could do these burial rites for. And not only that, but Antigone actively wants Ismene, at least at the beginning of the play, to follow her into this path of rebellion. This path that most certainly would not result in either one of them getting proper burial rites, as we see happens to Antigone, being quite literally buried alive and not, like... So she's trying to get her sister, her last remaining sibling, in fact, the last remaining child of the House of Labdacus, thanks to on that for a minute, to put herself against Creon in a position that will have all of them die and meet similar fates to Polynices and not meet their proper burial rites. So, there will be no one left to bury them properly, and that, to me, just seems kind of shitty.
Well, it drums back the thing of Antigone, get your head out of the hole of, like, I have to bury my brother, I have to bury my brother, I have to marry him. Look beyond yourself. And that's the whole thing of, like,
true, but so Antigone's whole thing is that her brother just died. She hasn't even had a chance to grieve him. Yeah. Really. So it's like I can understand why she's fixed on it.
Thinking beyond, like, thinking beyond, I think, is where...
Thinking beyond myself. Yeah,
There's two ideas that really jump out at me, and the first one, based on what Ryan said, is that at first the punishment for burying Polynices is being stoned to death, and then Creon walks that back because it's too harsh. The punishment can just be being buried alive.
Because Creon's reading his Foucault and knows that public executions arouse sympathy from the audience. Go on.
So, I like that, to think, like, maybe that's played into, Ismene's, like, reason that she doesn't want to. So one is, like, a very violent, and then the other is it's still violent, but slightly less gory, I guess. And I just want to know if that like came into her thought process of consideration when she was weighing her options. The second thing that it makes me think of is like the idea that in that Antigone references the gods over and over and over, that she also carries the steadfast belief that without a burial, the like eternal soul of Polyneices is going to be suffering. So, his embodied mortal suffering has ended when he's died, but there's something else to human beings, a certain je ne sais quoi, you could say, that is gonna suffer forever unless she does this. And so there's that like really like palpable sense of urgency, but it's also one where like people seem much more comfortable with being like, religion has a time and a place, and we can also let things slide sometimes.
Back to my point, like building off of that, I agree that there is this like grave consequences for the soul to not make its way across the river Styx, etc., etc. But Antigone is at the beginning of the play asking Ismene to put herself in that same possibility where you too might. We will save Polyneices' soul at the cost of our own, possibly not, because we will too be treated as traitors and be left to rot in the streets, perhaps. And I do like the point you brought up about how once the consequences lessened, maybe that's what gets her to change her mind. As I think an actor could definitely have a field day with that as part of their motivation.
Yeah.
And also, I don't know where else to bring this up, so I might just seed it in here a little bit before we move on. There's a tradition of, we could call it psychoanalytic criticism that definitely, with the incest that runs rampant in this family about why does Antigone care so much about Polyneices.
That's been on my mind this whole time.
I don't need to say more about it. I'm just going to plant it there, and maybe that's why this one sibling relationship means a lot more to her than maybe her other ones.
Potentially. All right, let's get into the last question. I think, Ryan, I'll let you start this one, as you seem to had some thoughts on it already. And that's, this play often makes a resurgence during times of political upheaval. What is it about this particular tragedy that makes it so open to revivals and adaptations?
So I will preface my answer to this with, when I was in third year of my undergrad at York University, I took a very amazing course. I forget what the actual proper title of it, but it was essentially contemporary adaptations of Greek tragedies, and it was a year-long course. We covered a wide breadth of material.
What? How did I miss that one?
It was into the theater department. It was a humanities and classics cross-listed, but I was very glad that I took it.
Yeah, no kidding. Sounds awesome.
Professor Marcia Blumberg, if you're watching, I still remember and still love that course, and it was amazing. And we read so many interesting contemporary or modern and contemporary plays in that course. And Antigone really is this interesting, very malleable text that has been adapted in so many different ways. Like, the most famous example is during World War II, Jean-Louis, who in 1944 wrote his modernization, you could call it, that very famously was staged in Nazi-occupied France for an audience of Nazis as entertainment while they were occupying the city of Paris. And it was this kind of very bold moment in theater history of there is your Führer on stage. And, you could argue, as some people have, that perhaps it was a politically toothless gesture that the Nazis didn't recognize their Führer on stage, but it is this, so it's a great example of the subversive power of theater slipping things under the radar and perhaps rousing up the French resistance within the city under the nose of their occupiers. And to stick in the World War II context, Brecht very famously in 1948 wrote his own, kind of post-World War II at this point, but very much Creon is Hitler, you get the idea, and then he also wrote The Irresistible Rise of Arturo Ui, which is much more on the nose about that allegory with Chicago mafia as opposed to ancient Greek tyrant. But one of my favorite plays that we read in this course was by Athol Fugard, the famous South African playwright, called The Island, which was set in Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was famously interred. And yeah, it's about two prisoners. Of course, we're dealing with apartheid era South Africa here, and two prisoners staging a production of Antigone in the prison, and really calling to mind like this. Like, I would encourage anyone watching or listening to read it. It's a fascinating play. We read another one by Griselda Gambero, set during the Argentine Dirty Wars, called Antigona Furiosa. We read by the contemporary Polish-American playwright, or maybe just Polish, I'm not sure, but it's called Antigone in New York, that reimagines a very contemporary setting of Antigone as a Puerto Rican homeless woman. And it was a very interesting kind of slapstick, farcey kind of take on the material, so would recommend that. And then we actually didn't read this one in that course, but one that I've encountered since is called Welcome to Thebes. It's a contemporary play from 2010, I think, by Moira Buffini. And it's about child soldiers, and it plays with a bunch of different Greek tragedies, but I would encourage anyone to check that out too. So a lot has been done. Sorry, this is all just background to the question, talking about why has it been adapted so much, and my answer so far has just been, it has, and here's some of them. But I think the answer to the question is kind of simple, and that Creon represents unjust laws, or if we strip away the complexity of his character, he can just represent unjust laws. Even if in my answer to the previous question, maybe advise people against that type of allegorical simplicity in their approach. And Antigone represents civil disobedience. So if we boil this play down to its raw elements, we have a very clear parable about civil disobedience in the face of unjust laws. And while I thankfully haven't seen one myself, I'm sure that there have been Trump-era Antigones that very much portray Creon as like a Trump figure. I'm sure over the next few years we will probably get a lot of Black Lives Matter inspired Antigone if we haven't had them already. And I'm sure in Canada we'll probably have some that are about residential schools. And like, it is this perfect, when boiled down to these bare essentials, it can kind of be mapped onto any political instance where civil disobedience is required as an antidote to unjust laws. And because laws are so often unjust, change doesn't come about without some sort of civil disobedience or political revolutionary action. And this play, being so famous and being, the kind of thing you can slip under the oppressor's nose, as Jean-Henri did in 1944, really does give a lot of possibility to be adapted and played with in this way, and can be applied to any political scenario.
Love it. Kel, what are your thoughts?
My favorite adaptation is Anne Carson's Antigone, which is quite a strange and poetic translation, where Carson takes many of her Carson-esque liberties with the text, and normally which I often dislike when other people do it, but Anne Carson fully gets a pass from me as probably my favorite poet and translator of all time. And two things that she does. First, her text is super visual. It comes across as handwritten, hand-illustrated. I forget the visual artist she was working with, their name specifically, but the physical book, the material aspect of it has had such thought and detail put into it that I just go back to it over and over and again. It's not one that I know of productions sort of here and there, but I can't point to one main stage well-known time where it was produced for the stage, because it does seem to be more of this sort of literary objet d'art. But what it really, perfectly gets at for me is that, you have these characters, you have this set of characters, Antigone, Ismene, Polyneices, and Eteocles, all as products of incest. They're marked out as different, they're marked out as other, and they, in the part of a couple of the, of Ismene, for example, she's really trying to be accepted. She's really trying to, assimilate, I guess, is like a word you could use for it. Whereas Antigone is going the other way and knowing that, she is this object of, gossip. She is seen as, this sort of abomination, for who she fundamentally is as a person, even though she is quite a high status person as being the niece of Creon. This society really doesn't know what to do with her, and I think that perfect outsider, the way that Oedipus too is a perfect outsider, in that he doesn't know that he's both the hyper insider and the outsider at the same time, leaves a lot of people open to an affinity with the character for saying, I'm persecuted, I'm on the outside just like that.
Wonderful. Well said, Cal. Great responses from everybody so far. Jill, let's keep these great responses coming.
Well, good news. It's basically if Ryan and Kel's notes had a baby was my brain thoughts. My brain baby. I literally have here, like, this entire plot is loose enough to mold for any political purpose. And I think Ryan already kind of mentioned this as well, but I think Kel sort of backed it up what she was saying too, and the idea of Antigone and what Antigone is supposed to, and characters like Ismene and Polyneices are supposed to represent. I think you can play that. I guess this is coming from a more like practical actor-director brain. You can Antigone can be any sort of like quote unquote other or minority or like as long as they're juxtaposed with Creon in some shape or form. And so I think that just leaves like a giant painter's palette for obviously Ryan's backed up sort of chronology of Antigone adaptations. Like there's so many pathways you can take with this piece. I've said this, I'm a broken record, but I say this all the time in our panels. I'm a huge advocate for taking old pieces and bringing them to today, not necessarily placing them in today's environment like this one, right? This one's era wasn't 2012 is when the show started, but takes place more of this Cold War sort of atmosphere. So I'm a huge advocate for taking pieces of our past, especially like the Greeks, the Romans, Shakespeare's, and bringing them in today. And what does it say? How are we analyzing? How are we reshaping? How are we reworking? Using sort of these OG skeletons, if you will. And I think Antigone is a pillar for that, and should be. Like if you want to sort of explore that more, I think this piece, especially being the Greeks, so arguably one of the oldest OGs to do this sort of exploration work with, but as we see in this production is a great sort of case study for this. There's so much you can do, not only with the message at hand, but with each individual character, depending on what your pathway you choose. So a lot to do with this, and I think it also just it creates the the idea of the self versus society, right? And like the what does it happen? Like, what are the ramifications that happen when the sort of crux of humanity and society is on one person's shoulders? I just said with this show in particular, I think it creates a lovely playground to sort of juxtapose self and society, parallel self and society, and you can sort of open that up to any interpretation you want.
Yep. Wonderful. Yeah, okay. So for me, I go, yeah, absolutely. Right away, Antigone is a perfect kind of vestal to represent the other of any society, the outsider, for sure. But I think this tragedy is also great because it's a really great way to display the way power consumes leaders and the cautionary tale to leadership of it's okay to show weakness in the sense of changing of opinion and changing of mind. We are so often quick to criticize our leaders for changing our position or for changing a viewpoint when it's like, hold on, humans learn and grow. We all learn and grow, and our leaders do the same. Our leaders learn and change. I mean, one of the greatest things JFK ever did was after the Bay of Pigs disaster, he came out on national television and acknowledged his wrongdoing. And instead of doubling down and trying to keep invading Cuba, he really was about, nope, military might didn't work this time. I got to reassess what I have to do to work diplomatically. And so that's big there. I mean, it goes all sides of the spectrum. I mean, we're seeing right now in the news Republican Liz Cheney, after in 2013 opposing the legalization of gay marriage, has now come out in support of it. And, I mean, right or wrong about her and her viewpoints or standpoints, the fact that she is open enough now to say that to a base that is very much against LGBTQIA+ rights is a step forward. And I think as leaders, leaders are too afraid to look weak or to look like they've made a mistake, and they will double down on something instead of actually taking time to reflect. And I think that's what this plays great about. Is Creon realizes too late his mistake, his error, and it costs him dearly. It costs him his wife, his son, his niece. He loses it all, as we've said many times. Like he loses it all and loses his power to boot. So it's a great cautionary tale of saying it's okay to take time and reflect and change, and don't be too stubborn. Don't get stuck in your rut. Be a human. Accept fallibility. Accept that yes, mistakes are made. You're a better leader for it. By coming forward and saying, yep, nope, with me. My information was wrong. I was wrong with this particular standpoint. This wasn't the way to go. Let me change and move forward. So that's why I think this play is so interesting. Is that it's this interesting comment on power in the way oftentimes leaders are too afraid to admit their mistake. So yeah, wonderful. Okay, great. Well, let's do a sign off. Cal, where can people find and follow you?
I am very lacking in social media, but my theater company that I co-run with the wonderful Hillary Peck has an Instagram account that Hillary runs, and it is called the.precariat. So you can find her on Instagram, and if you desperately need to get a hold of me, I have a website, which is cal-macdonald, macdonald.com.
Love it. We'll put all that in the description below, too. Jill, where can people find and follow you?
Yes, as always, you can follow me and find me on Instagram. My artist Instagram account is jillian.robinson96. And yeah, your eyes peeled for future potential projects that are coming down the line.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Wonderful. Ryan, Give us that classic Ryan Borochovitz send-off we all know and love.
I'm also not active on social media. So yeah, just send all that love to Cup of Hemlock. Say it's the channel and or podcast feed you are watching / listening to now. Like, share, and subscribe. At time of recording, we've just reached 100 YouTube subscribers, which is more by the time you're watching this, or not. But yeah, it might be.
We'll have lost some.
Yeah, that happens.
All down here in this shocking display of hubris from Ryan Borochovitz.
How dare I be happy that we got 100? How hubristic of me. But yeah, just send that love. Let's bring it to 200. Why don't we? How's that for hubris?
Love it. Wonderful. You can find and follow me at all social media platforms at Mackenzie Horner. If you want to hear me talk about musicals, check out my other podcast before the Downbeat a Musical podcast. And as of this recording, I can officially say that we have done our episode with Jill, where she came on as a wonderful guest co-host, and we talked all about the puppet adult Sesame Street musical, Avenue Q. And we got to deep dive and pick that sucker apart. It was lots of fun. So check that on out on that feed too. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe on all our social media platforms at Cup of Hemlock Theatre, including our podcast feed. If you want to take us on the go in an audio-only format. There you go. Until then, everybody, stay healthy, stay safe, and we will see you all in the next episode. Thanks. Bye!